Eritrea-Ethiopia Framework for Just and Secure Sea Access by Bereket Habtemariam Biko. This essay is submitted in a personal capacity, without affiliation to any organization. Its purpose is to set forth a framework that secures Eritrea's sovereignty, responds to Ethiopia's declared existential concerns, and establishes a durable peace beyond the politics of the day. Should a discussion on such a balanced framework be declined, his request for access must be understood not as a question of survival, but as one advanced for ulterior purpose. Background, memory, law, and the present request in the Horn of Africa. The past is never buried. Borders may be marked on maps, but they continue to live in memory and grievance. Ethiopia and Eritrea share more than a front. They share the scars of war, the breath of commerce, and the silence of estrangement. When they fought, both bled. When they cooperated, both prospered. Ethiopia now declares that access to the Red Sea is existential. In law and diplomacy, that word is never casual. Existential means survival itself. It is used for famine, collapse, or war. If Ethiopia's plea is framed in such terms, Eritrea has a duty to hear it. No neighbor turns away from another's cry for life. Yet Eritrea, too, must weigh its history. Requests for existential lifelines rarely remain narrow. What begins as a promise of trade can expand, first to roads, then to R&D escorts, then to questions of who controls the corridors, and finally to disputes about who governs the space around them. This is not imagination. It is the pattern of history, repeated from the Middle East to Africa, from Europe to Asia. Thus, Eritrea's hesitation is not a refusal to help. It is a demand for clarity. HCW: can Ethiopia's survival be secured without putting Eritrea's sovereignty in peril? The law of the sea and misunderstood sovereignty. Here lies the heart of the matter. Eritrean voices for justice, not the dictatorship in Asmara, but those outside it, have for years called for this debate to be framed correctly, not as a matter of Eritrea ceding sovereignty, but as Eritrea offering Ethiopia lawful, commercial service access under the law of the sea. That law is clear. Coastal states remain sovereign. Landlocked states may seek access, but access is negotiated, not imposed. The Chile v. Bolivia decision of the International Court of Justice in 2018 is decisive. Bolivia, though landlocked, could not compel Chile to grant it sovereign access to the sea. Chile had no obligation. Sovereignty remained intact. Eritrea stands in the same position as Chile. It cannot be compelled. Yet Ethiopia, unlike Bolivia, cast its request as existential. That choice alters its very character. Eritrea cannot answer by shutting the door. It must answer by shaping a safeguard, one that addresses the weight of Ethiopia's existential claim while preserving the permanence of Eritrea's sovereignty. The principle, you cut, I choose. When a nation declares that its survival hangs on the decision of another, it sets the scale of the problem. Survival is not a bargaining chip. It is not a commodity traded like grain or coffee. It is the highest claim a state can make. And when such a claim is made, the neighbor asked to bear the weight of it acquires not only a duty to listen, but also a right to protect itself. Ethiopia now says the Red Sea is existential. To speak in that language is to move the discussion beyond ordinary commerce. It is no longer about docking fees, trade routes, or tariffs. It is about life and death. In law and diplomacy, once the stakes are raised to that level, fairness demands that the one asked to carry the burden designs the safeguard. This is not sentiment. It is the principle of equity. Think of it in simple terms. In commerce, when one hand cuts the cake, the other chooses the slice. Why? Because the cutter has power and fairness requires a counterbalance. If Ethiopia defines the problem as survival, Eritrea must be given the choice of the safeguard. Without that balance, the arrangement is tilted from the start, and history shows where such tilts lead toward suspicion, escalation, and conflict. Eritrea's concern is not abstract. History has taught it that agreements entered in goodwill can, under pressure, expand far beyond their first promise. Today the request may be framed as access to a port. Tomorrow it may be framed as a corridor. The next day as security over that corridor. And beyond that, perhaps as a permanent joint administration. each step defended as necessary, each step explained as temporary, until the temporary becomes permanent and the sovereign becomes compromised. If Ethiopia says its survival depends on Eritrean ports, then Eritrea has the right, and the obligation to its own people, to insist on protection strong enough to ensure that today's lifeline does not become tomorrow's encroachment. The safeguard must match the claim. If the request is existential, the protection must be structural, enduring, and written into law. Only in that way does the principle of fairness hold. Only in that way can Eritrea open the door without fear that the house will, in time, be claimed by another. IV structure of the safeguard. Eritrea should not propose this safeguard out of ambition. It should propose it because the request before it leaves no other path. Ethiopia has defined its need as existential, its very survival. If survival is the claim, then Eritrea, though small, cannot ignore it. No state may close its ears when a neighbor cries out that life itself is at stake. But the law and history teach that such cries, if unbounded, can swallow the sovereignty of the one who answers them. Eritrea must therefore accommodate, but only with a structure strong enough to hold both peoples in safety. The safeguard is this: Ethiopia must amend its constitution so that its federal executive, the office armed with powers over defense, foreign policy, and national security, is nominated by Eritrea's executive chief, future holders, not today's undemocratic regime, and confirmed by a freely elected Eritrean parliament. That executive may only be removed by a vote of no confidence in the Eritrean parliament. This safeguard rests on limits as strict as iron. First, no intrusion into Ethiopia's federal states. Oromia will remain Oromia. Amhara will remain Amhara. Tigray will govern itself as Tigray. Somali will stand as Somali. Eritrea claims no reach into their assemblies, their languages, their schools, their police. The federal executive Eritrea nominates does not rule them. He rules only the space the Ethiopian constitution already sets aside for the federal government: defense, treaties, national security, and foreign affairs. Eritrea asks for no more and accepts no less. To Ethiopia, this is the guarantee: your regional states remain untouched, your federal system intact. Second, authority is defined and bounded. The Eritrean-nominated executive has powers only where Ethiopia's survival connects directly to Eritrea's sovereignty at the federal level and nowhere else. He cannot levy taxes in Oromia. He cannot regulate schools in Amhara. He cannot command police in Tigray. His hand stops where the Ethiopian constitution draws the line between federal and state. Eritrea asks to nominate not a ruler, but a guardian charged only with those duties where Ethiopia's need for the sea and Eritrea's need for security meet. Third, accountability is dual. This executive is not free to act against either people. He stands in office only so long as Ethiopia's parliament continues to empower him by law and Eritrea's parliament continues to hold him in confidence. Should Eritrea withdraw that confidence, he falls. Should Ethiopia's legislature choose to dissolve the arrangement, it may reclaim its full power by renouncing the port rights granted under this covenant. Thus each nation holds a key: Eritrea to remove, Ethiopia to depart. No side is chained. Fourth, reversibility is guaranteed. Ethiopia may retake exclusive appointment power by giving up its special access to Eritrea's ports. Eritrea may end its nomination role by withdrawing the arrangement. Either side may walk away if it no longer serves its people. This ensures that what is agreed today will never become a permanent chain tomorrow. It is a pact, not a surrender; a covenant, not an annexation. This design is not a gift from Eritrea to Ethiopia, nor is it a weapon pressed upon Ethiopia. It is a structure built because the claim has been framed as survival. When survival is claimed, fairness demands that sovereignty be shielded by law. That is what this safeguard does. It allows Eritrea to say yes without saying forever, and it allows Ethiopia to seek life without demanding ownership of another's body. Why this matters to both peoples. For Eritrea, sovereignty is preserved. A small nation does not risk slow erosion of its identity through temporary concessions that history shows are never temporary. For Ethiopia, certainty is secured. No future leader can bargain away sea access. No single party can gamble the lifeline of 120 million people. This is not about trust. It is about certainty. Trust shifts with politics. Structure endures beyond it. VI. Safeguards equal to the risk. History does not whisper here. It speaks plainly with a record written in law and blood. When one nation asks for permanent access to another's coast, the question is not trade alone, it is sovereignty. And sovereignty, once compromised, is rarely restored. Colonial history shows the danger. Powers once entered Africa through treaties of access. They came as traders promising cooperation. Over time, cooperation became control. Access became dominion. What began as partnership ended as possession. Eritrea cannot ignore this pattern. International law strengthens this caution. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, recognizes the plight of landlocked states, granting them rights of access to and from the sea. But these rights are framed as cooperation, not compulsion. Article 125(1) speaks of freedom of transit through the territory of transit states by agreement on terms mutually acceptable. The phrase is decisive. By agreement. No duty to surrender sovereignty. No obligation to transfer control. Access exists, but only through cooperation that preserves the territorial state's consent. The International Court of Justice confirmed this principle in 2018 in the case of obligation to negotiate access to the Pacific Ocean, Bolivia v. Chile. Bolivia, landlocked after the War of the Pacific, argued it had a legal right to compel Chile to negotiate sovereign access to the sea. The court rejected the claim. Its holding was clear. Chile had no obligation under international law to cede territory or sovereignty, even to relieve Bolivia's landlocked condition. The lesson for Eritrea is direct. No state, however landlocked, can impose a burden on its neighbor's sovereignty. Ethiopia, then, stands where Bolivia once stood. Eritrea, like Chile, has the right to say no. The law is on its side. Yet Eritrea does not seek to hide behind the letter of the law. The spirit of cooperation in UNCLOS invites states to find arrangements that serve both peoples. Thus, Eritrea may say, "We are not compelled, but we are willing, if and only if the safeguard is equal to the risk." What safeguard meets this test? Here history again gives an answer. The Lebanese TAIF Agreement of 1989 ended a brutal civil war not by trust, but by structure. It permanently allocated top offices of the state along confessional lines, the president to a Maronite Christian, the prime minister to a Sunni Muslim, the speaker of parliament to a Shia Muslim. These posts are not rotated, not subject to election by all. They are assigned to guarantee that no one community is erased from power. Imperfect though it is, Lebanon's power-sharing model endures because it builds survival into the state's very design. The parallel to Ethiopia's request is exact. If Eritrea is asked to guarantee Ethiopia's survival by offering permanent access to the Red Sea, then Eritrea may equally insist that its own survival be guaranteed by assigning a federal position in Ethiopia's governance, not as a token, not as a courtesy, but as a permanent structure, binding as law, that ties Ethiopia's lifeline to Eritrea's security. Just as Lebanon secured peace by embedding representation at the highest level, Eritrea may secure sovereignty by embedding oversight at Ethiopia's federal level. Thus the logic unfolds. Colonial access became domination because safeguards were weak. The ICJ confirms that no state is obliged to yield sovereignty. Eritrea has the legal right to refuse. The law of the sea allows cooperation without compulsion, preserving Eritrea's sovereignty. Lebanon shows that survival can be guaranteed by permanently assigning positions, not leaving them to shifting politics or elections. Taken together, the conclusion is not stated, but it is inescapable. If Ethiopia's request is extraordinary, the safeguard must be extraordinary. Survival demands safeguards equal to the risk. VLI. Closing counsel. This proposal is not born of sympathy for dictatorship. Eritrea's present rulers cannot claim authorship of it, nor may they twist it as their shield. The voice that speaks here is the voice of Eritreans who believe in justice, democracy, and a peace built on law rather than whim. The Ethiopian request is extraordinary. It is framed as existential, a matter of life and death for the state. History shows that when survival is invoked, the ordinary limits of negotiation collapse. Concessions offered in such moments do not remain narrow, they expand, carried forward by necessity. For this reason alone, any safeguard that answers such a request must itself be extraordinary. Eritrea, therefore, should not answer with refusal to such a request, today and forever. Refusal would deny history, ignore law, and dismiss the humanity of a neighbor's plea to live and survive. Eritrea should answer with a conditional yes. Yes, but only through safeguards strong enough to preserve both Ethiopia's lifeline and Eritrea's sovereignty. Yes, but only through a structure firm enough to endure when trust falters. Yes, but only through balance, so that the cry for survival does not become, in time, a tool for dominance. Here lies the heart of the Council. If Ethiopia's leaders accept this framework, they prove before the world that survival is their true aim, greater than any monopoly of power, stronger than the temptation of expansion. If they reject it, then the Ethiopian people will have reason to ask, was the claim of existential need ever about their survival, or was it from the start a mask for power? Was it truly about the nation's welfare, or God forbid about leaders clinging to authority even at the cost of their people's future? From the standpoint of Eritreans who stand for justice and democracy, this framework settles the question with clarity. If Ethiopia accepts it, the step will move in the only direction where a genuine solution to its declared existential concern can be found. If Ethiopia rejects it, then the claim of existential urgency falls away on its own terms. That rejection would at last remove the suffocating distraction of this side issue and leave us with air enough to confront the true existential struggle before us. The fight against dictatorship. Conclusion: the lesson of law is plain. Goodwill, however noble, cannot secure the future of nations. Treaties written on faith alone dissolve in the heat of politics. Structures, once built, stand beyond the passions of men. In life, as in law, survival rests not on hope but on design. That is why Eritrea, speaking through its pro-justice voices, shall place its hand forward, not in denial, not in surrender, but in covenant. For if survival is truly at stake, then both nations deserve a safeguard worthy of survival itself. Thank you for taking your time to prepare this important document. Do not forget to subscribe the channel.